So over here inside of login, let's just first put in a very simple component. So we have login like that. So new file index.js as well, and then login here. So we have index.js, which includes login, and then root, which then includes login here inside the sidebar. And we're going to do just that. So we're going to do that for login and then do login down here. So now you see I have login over here on the side. And if I zoom out again, back to normal, so then it is over here. So that is where login will be. So for login here, we are going to use a React hook form. So import use form from React hook form. And I've made videos on how to use React hook form in the past as well. So you can go check those out if you feel like that's necessary. But what we're going to do is just do const and then form state is submitting, handle submit, and also register is equal to use form like that. So these are the ones we are going to use. And here we're going to write form on submit is equal to on submit, and we'll define on submit right now. So let's just say put something there, and then let's go here and let's do const on submit is equal to handle submit. And let's just say we take in the email and the password, and then let's just do console log email password. So if it works correctly, we'll have both of those onto the page. So now inside of here, let's first create a couple components. So firstly, the styled component is going to be a label is equal to style.label like that. And then we're going to do a display block. And then for those that aren't the first child, we're going to give it a margin top of 0.75 rem. So now inside of here, we're going to include a label. So the label is going to look like this, and I'm going to type something inside of there. But more specifically, we're going to have label text. So const label text is equal to style.strong like that. And inside of here, we're going to do a display block. Font size is 0.9 rem, and then the margin bottom on these is going to be 0.25 rem. So the label text goes inside of the label. So we're going to do label text here, and then email like that, for example. And let's just type ASDF there, see where that goes. So we have this over here, which hopefully should work once React hook form downloads and installs itself. Okay, so now that that is built, let's see what it looks like on the page. So it should just show email and ASDF, but it seems to not be showing anything. Styled is not defined, so I forgot to include import styled from styled components like that. Let's do that here. And now let's refresh, we got email and ASDF. So now instead of showing ASDF, let's include one for the text input. So for the text input here, we're actually going to go into components, new file shared / text input.js. And the reason for that is because a text input is generic enough that any component that we build that's surrounding a text input, we should consider, componentizing and putting aside for modular reuse. So we're going to go here and write import styled from styled components like that. We're going to do const text import is equal to style.input like so. And let's do a couple of things here. So first one is box sizing going to be border box, display block, font size 0.9 rem, padding going to be 0.25 rem, and the width is going to be 100%. So now we export default text input here, and we actually have one more style we have to add inside of here. But before we do that, let's go into index.js, and I'm going to show you what I'm going to do here. So we're going to go into src, new file, and create a new file called theme.js. So specifically, the theme consists of the colors that you use within a project. Now, this is something I like to do because in a project, especially one that gets larger, it starts to become more difficult to have a coherent design language. In other words, that all your components kind of look the same, feel the same, so on and so forth. So you kind of want that consistency, and a great way to get there is to have a set of theme constants. And part of that generally includes simple range of colors. So one of the colors I'm going to use here is I call very light gray, and I get that name from this website. So if you just search color name and hue, I use this one here to give basically a wide range of colors different names. So for example, if I go here and the color I want to use is actually 6 C's in a row, you'll notice that the name of the color is very light gray. So that's the one we're going to use here. Export const very light gray is equal to hash and then 6 C's like that. And we have this color in here. So now what we're going to do is inside of index.js, we're going to go in here and then do import or as theme from /theme. So we're going to grab that theme and let's do a theme provider inside of styled components like that. And instead of rendering this, we're going to render a theme provider theme is equal to theme. So basically this allows us to use the theme within our styled components. So theme provider there like so as well. And inside of text import, we are going to do border 1 pixel solid, and then we're going to do this weird kind of template function syntax. So we do passing the props, and we do a props.theme dot very light gray. So basically props.theme always has access to this theme object that we passed in, and we have access to very light gray. So that's one we're going to use, and we pass that in as the border. And now if we have a look on our page, if we include the text input, so firstly go here, import text input from root / components / shared, and then text input like that. And we go down here underneath label text, let's do a text input, and it's disabled if it is in fact submitting. The name is going to be email, the type is going to be email, and we're going to register that inside of React Hook form. So now we have this, let's grab this and duplicate it. Let's change this one to be name is password, type is also password as well, which is nice, and the label text is going to be password. So we have these two fields here on the page, and now you'll notice we have email and we have password. And the reason we put this label around it is so that we can click on the text and it will take us into the field here, which is really nice. So now that we have these two, let's also add in the login button. So the login button, we go up here, and all we really do is const login button equals style.button, and we're going to do a display inline block. We do display inline block because that allows us to give it a margin top. So margin top here, we're going to do 0.5 rem. Like so, and we have our login button, which we're going to include here. So login button type is equal to submit, and we're going to write log in. So this one here should also be disabled if it is submitting. So disabled equals is submitting like that, and then we do that. So now that we have this, let's have a look at our page. We have email, we have password, and we have log in. So now if we open up the console and just maybe put that down here, let's make the console a little bit bigger. And here for the email and password, let's just try, say, for example, test at example.com, and for the password like so. And you see we get test at example.com and password. So that is working just fine, which is great. But now instead of just, console logging inside of here, we're actually going to have to do something with it. So in order to do that, we're going to have to include some GraphQL stuff. So inside of here, inside of package.json, let's start including the stuff that we need for GraphQL. So specifically, let's first go to the classifieds app. So inside of here, we are going to do yarn add Apollo cache in memory. We're going to do Apollo client, Apollo link HTTP. Just make sure that that is correct. Yes, it is. And we are going to do GraphQL tag as well. And we are also going to do Apollo, React Apollo. Let's also do at Apollo / React hooks like that. So now let's press enter. So now we have a whole bunch of stuff inside of here, which is pretty cool. But then inside of index.js here, where we have our global, we are going to include another provider. But before we do that, we have to include the API, the actual GraphQL client. So right click src, new file API / GraphQL client.js. So now inside of this file here, let's do import, and then let's do Apollo client from Apollo client like that. Let's do import HTTP link from Apollo link HTTP. Like that, and let's do import in-memory cache from Apollo cache in memory. So let's do those three, and then export const cache is equal to in-memory cache. I like to export it, and I've mentioned this before because sometimes I use it, but in this case here, I'm exporting it for really no good reason. So you can choose not to if you don't want to. Const client equals new Apollo client like that, and we're going to use this cache. And for our link, we're going to do new HTTP link credentials is going to be include. So this allows us to work with cookies and sessions and all that kind of stuff. And we are going to do URI and then process.env.services URI plus / GraphQL. Export default client. So now we have this file here, but we actually don't have process.env services URI. So in order to include this, we're going to go into classifieds app, create a new file, and call this one .env. And inside of this file here, we are going to do services URI is equal to HTTP localhost 7000. So the reason that we do this is because this matches our services URI here, and then we add / GraphQL onto the end there. So we have .env, and we also have .env.example because .env will be ignored by gitignore, so we kind of include a .env.example file here as well. So now that we have this file and that one set up, let's include this inside of index.js. So we're going to go up here, and we're going to write import Apollo provider from React Apollo like that, and we are going to go around our theme provider, and we're going to add Apollo provider, and then we are going to right here, a client is equal to GraphQL client like that, and we are going to include GraphQL client from the API. So import GraphQL client from #root / API / GraphQL client. So now we have a GraphQL client that we've hooked up. Let's try yarn watch, make sure that everything's working just fine. Okay, everything seems fine to me. And then over here, it seems to be running. So let's continue now. Inside of root, inside of login here, we've got our login component. And inside of here, we are going to include a mutation. So specifically, we're going to include the mutation in order to log in. So to do that, let's go to the very top and let's add in import use mutation from @Apollo/React hooks. And let's also add in import GQL from GraphQL tag like that. So we have these two here. And then now underneath our styled components, but above our component here, we are going to add in our mutation. So const mutation equals GQL like that. And we're going to do a mutation. And it's going to have an email, which is a string, and a password, which is also a string like that. Like that, and we're going to do a create user session, and we're going to pass in the email variable and pass in the password variable. So we're not really hard coding anything here, which is really nice. So we have the ID, and we're also going to pass in user email ID. Now before we continue, this doesn't actually currently work. So let's grab this user bit here and let's try it inside of our playground. So remember that this is working just fine, but if I go here and I add in the user, you'll notice that now it breaks because it doesn't have any way to resolve this. So in order to fix this issue, let's go back into API Gateway, and we're going to go into SRC GraphQL resolvers, and here instead of just having mutation in query, let's add in another one for user session. So this is going to be a custom resolver that we're going to add onto a property which belongs inside of user session. So now here underneath mutation in query, let's add in user session. And let's put the user session here, and user session is just going to be an object like that, which we then export default. So we do that, and inside of here, we are going to pass in user. So specifically, this is going to be an async one that takes in the user session. Now, the first one here is the object inside of our resolver. Now, the object refers to essentially the contextual value, the contextual object on which this is running. So in the case of user session, this will be the user session object. If this were on the user GraphQL type, then it will be an instance of that. So that's kind of how this value changes. And then inside of here, we are going to do return await users service.fetch user by the user ID, which is going to be user session.user ID like that. So remember how the user session contains a user ID, we're going to use that to fetch the user. So obviously we need to include user service from #root /adapters/users service like that. And inside of users service here, we need to add in fetch user. Now you notice, once again, I've said this before, I'm saying it one more time, is that with microservices, there's a lot of updating everything in quite a few places. And there's really no getting around that at this moment, is that we have these kinds of separate concerns. And because we want to keep them separate, some code we need to write many, many times and hook up many different things to get one thing working. So now here for fetch user, what we're going to do is we're going to do const body is equal to await got.get, and let's actually put this one above this one here. And the reason for that is because we have create user, fetch user, create user session, and we're going to also have like fetch user session and stuff down there. So we're going to do got.get like that, and then users service URI, and we're going to do /users/user ID. Now, if you're paying attention, you'll notice that we actually haven't built out this route here. So once again, we're going to have to go into the user service here in order to build out this route. So now let's go into server, go into routes here, and we are going to add another route here. So specifically under here, we're going to do app.get /users/user ID like that. And we're going to do async the request, response, and next like so. And we're going to do try, and then const user equals await user.find by PK. So we're going to find by the primary key, which is the ID, and we're going to take in the params, the user ID. And then if we cannot find this user, we return a new error. And this one's going to be invalid user ID like that. And then we do, if we can find the user, we do return res.json and the user like that. And then if we get an error, then we do return next, and we pass that error along. So now that we have this functionality in all three places, ideally we should be able to fetch the user inside of this one here. So now if I press play, if everything works, now you see we get the user in there, which is really nice. So now let's go back into our classifieds app. Definitely a huge tangent there, but there's not much we can do. We have user email ID, and then inside of here, we are going to actually use this mutation. So in order to do that, let's go here and let's write a const square brackets create user session is equal to use mutation, and we're going to pass in that mutation like that. So now inside of here, we're going to make this one async, and let's just do a const, let's just say result equals await create user session, and we're going to pass in the variables, so curly braces variables, email, and password like that. So now we have the result, and we're going to do console log result like that. Okay, great. So now we have result console log result, and let's have a look at our page. So our page seems to have broken, and it's because we don't have regenerator runtime. So in order to fix this problem, all you have to do is inside of index.js, at the very top here, just do import @babel/polyfill. And once you do that, it should start packaging, build it, and then everything should be working just fine. So now anyways, we got this one here. Let's try logging in. So test1@example.com. Like that, and then the password is just password. So now if we open up the console again and click login, you'll notice that here we have data, create user session, user. So everything's working fine, and it's actually allowing us to log in. So basically the login functionality is complete, but the only way we can kind of continue with the login component is if we have a way of fetching the actual user's current session. So in order to do that, let's go back into our user service over here, and we're going to try and figure out if we can get information surrounding the user's current session. So now inside of routes over here, what we're going to do is we're going to add underneath .post sessions. We're going to add in here, we're going to do app.get/sessions/ and then session ID like that. I'm going to do async request response and next like that. And then inside of here, we're going to do a quick try. Const user session is equal to, and very similar, user session.find by PK, request.params.session ID. So remember that we're passing in the session ID here. So we're just going to try find that straight away like so. And we're going to do if the user session cannot be found, then we do return next new error, and then it's going to be invalid session ID. However, if it can be found, we're going to continue and do return res.json with the user session. And if we get an error, as always, we do return next e, and we pass that error along. So now we have this bit of code here, which allows us to fetch any given session with an ID. So now inside of API gateway, what we're going to do is inside of server here, we're actually going to include a custom piece of middleware. So the way this works here is we're going to create a new file, right click new file, inject session.js. So for this file here, we're going to do import users service from hash root adapters, and then obviously user service like that. I'm going to do const inject session is equal to async, and then request response and next. So request response next like so. And then if request.cookies, and you might remember this keyword here, user session ID, which is the same one we used inside of mutation here, create user session. So we use the same user session ID for the cookies. If this one does exist, we try to get that session. So const user session is equal to await users service.fetch user session, and we fetch it by the session ID. The session ID is request.cookies.user session ID, like that. And then res.locals.user session is equal to user session. So response.locals, res.locals is basically a custom object where you can store a whole bunch of stuff. And one of the things that we're storing it inside of here specifically is information surrounding the user session. So that's what we're going to do here. And either way, we're going to return next, which moves us on to the next piece of middleware. So now we do that, we do export default inject session. So something like that, just to get it moving on. And now let's include this inside of start server. So underneath format GraphQL errors, let's do inject session like that. Let's grab inject session, and then above here and above the Apollo server bit and underneath cause, we're going to do app.use inject session just like that. So now that we have this section here in our code, we need to go into user service, and we need to actually define fetch user session because we currently do not have that. So we have create user, fetch user, create user session, and fetch user session. So only that makes sense. And we fetch it by the session ID. So we pass in session ID here, and we do const body equals await, and then got.get, and then obviously this one here again, users service URI, and then /sessions/ and then session ID. Like that. So we pass the session ID in, and then we do .json, and we return the body, whatever data we get back. So we have now fetched user session, we have inject session over here, and we have that inside of start server. But what we're actually going to do with this is inside of typedef here, inside of query, let's include a way for the client or the front-end user to fetch if they are currently logged in, or whichever session they're currently using. So what we're going to use is one called user session, and this one's going to take me, which is a Boolean. So at the moment it's a Boolean which is required. So basically this one has to be like, you have to fetch yourself, but the idea is that in the future it can expand to fetch other user sessions, however that might work. And then this one here returns a user session, or it doesn't. So we don't want to put an exclamation mark, because if the user is not logged in, then this will return null. So we don't actually want to put an exclamation mark. So we do user session like that. And then inside of query here, we're going to add that in. So export default as user session. Right click new file, user session.js, and we're going to copy the one for listings, go here, we're going to take this one and we're going to write user session resolver. Inside of this file here, this one's relatively simple, is we're going to just use a request. So the first one is obj args and the context. And then if args.me is not equal to true, like I said, we're only supporting true at this time. So we can throw an error, say unsupported argument value. And then here we're going to do return context.res.locals.user session. So we're going to return the session from there, and basically it allows us to access that. So now that we have this, let's go back here. Let's refresh, zoom this in a bit again. Okay, now everything does seem to be running. So now let's go here, refresh, and we should get the GraphQL interface showing up. For some reason, it does not seem to be showing. And the error we're getting is an internal 500 server error. I think it might be due to the fact that we included this inject session thing here, but it does not seem to be telling me what the problem is. It might be related to the fetch user session here, which is fetching from here, which is going to user service URI sessions and then the session ID. So seems like we have a bit of debugging here to do. In order to fix this problem, it's probably best to have a look at here. So let's do .catch and then grab the error, and let's do console.log e.response.body. So let's see what the actual body of the request gives us. So now let's refresh over here, and we should get an error pretty soon, hopefully. Okay, so the error is cannot read session property, session ID of undefined. So for fetch user session here, we are doing request.cookies.user session ID. So this shouldn't be an issue because we're doing a request.cookies.user session ID here. And this error actually is coming from the user's service. So inside of user service here, let's go back into routes. We do sessions here. Oh, we wrote request.params. Okay, that's totally my bad. Should be request.params. But anyways, now let's get this .catch out of the way. In terms of error handling, I do have a general note. If you have any questions like, why are you doing this way? Isn't this way better? My general comment is this, which is that this project is done mostly with microservices in mind. I do try to cover as many of the best practices as I can, given the size of this video and obviously the duration and complexity, all that kind of stuff. And then I chose to make a few shortcuts, for example, in terms of error handling, in terms of the overall, I guess, more miscellaneous design choices. I try to keep as minimalistic as possible. So anyways, now let's try and see if we can get this one working. So we do curly braces here, and we do say, for example, user session me true. So actually, before I run this, we need to get something from the Chrome Web Store in order to see if we have the cookie actually inside of our browser. So let's go to cookie here, and we should get something come up pretty soon. So let's do edit this cookie. This is the one I like to use. Click add extension. Great, so now over here, we can refresh the playground, and we have edit this cookie thing, and you'll notice that we have user session ID, and it does have one inside of here. So what that means is that this should return us the same ID as that. And this one here is 9CF something, so let's see how this goes. So we get unsupported argument value, even though it does seem like we passed in the correct value here. So let's see what's going on. If we go into here, user session, we got args.me. This one here should be args.me is not equal to true, like that, not with an exclamation mark at the front. So now let's wait for that to restart and click play one more time, and we get user session is null. Now that's really weird because technically it should return this, but it seems like we're not getting it inside of this part here. So let's go into inject session and see what's actually happening here. So let's do a console.log user session, and let's see what we get back. So over here we're restarting, and then we show, wait for it to show. Okay, great. So now let's click play. And we're still getting back nothing there. It doesn't seem to be going inside of here. So it seems like our cookie actually isn't being recognized at all. So let's have a look at request.cookies and see what's going on there, or maybe if it's even running this function at all. So I'm kind of having a few questions here in terms of debugging why it isn't working, but we have to try and figure that out. So it seems like we get an object with a null prototype and there's nothing inside. So basically we're not getting any cookies at the moment. So we do have cookie parser here. I think that the reason it's not working, and if I remember correctly, is that the default GraphQL playground actually doesn't allow you to have cookies basically be passed through. So in order to fix that, we just need to go to this page here. So right click settings, and then for credentials, instead of using emit, we're going to use include. So now let's make sure Command S, we save this file, or press this button here, and let's go back here, press play, and we get our session ID. So now if we do user, we can do ID, we can also do the email. So now we have that information here as well. So that's really cool because now we can actually start using this in the front end. So over here inside of the classifieds app, what we're going to actually do is start fetching that information, and we're going to store it inside of Redux.